The screaming stopped first. Then the golden light flickered. Captain Valdris pressed his gauntleted hand against the psychic dampener, feeling the metal grow cold beneath his palm. The readings couldn't be right. 10,000 years of continuous power. 10,000 years of the Emperor's will holding back the darkness. Now the needle trembled at 0. "Sir." The tech priest's voice cracked through his vox grill. "The Astronomicon is failing." Valdris turned toward the observation deck. Through the reinforced glass, he watched the golden throne's eternal flame sputter like a candle in wind. The smell of ozone and burnt incense filled the chamber. His breath fogged in the suddenly frigid air. Across the galaxy, navigators screamed as the Emperor's light died in their third eyes. Ships tumbled blind through the warp. Worlds went dark. But on Ulanor Prime, something else was happening. Something the Imperium had dismissed as impossible. The Green Tide wasn't just winning battles anymore. They were learning, adapting, building something that defied every strategic projection. The WAAAGH had found their ultimate prize. Valdris felt his knees buckle as the psychic scream hit him. Every human soul in the galaxy felt it. The death cry of hope itself. The Emperor's protection, stripped away in an instant. On his tactical display, red warning lights cascaded like blood. Fortress worlds, hive cities, space marine chapters, all reporting the same impossible message. The Greenskins had done it. They had won. Valdris watched the last flicker of golden light die in the throne's crystalline heart. In the sudden darkness, he could hear something new, something that made his blood freeze. Laughter, deep, guttural, echoing from every shadow. The Orks weren't just celebrating victory. They were savoring it, tasting the fear that now flooded every Imperial world. The terror of a species that had just realized their god-emperor was mortal after all. Valdris gripped his bolt pistol, knowing it was useless now. The tech priest's augmetic eye sparked and died. "Emperor, preserve us," he whispered. But the Emperor was gone. And in the growing darkness, something far worse was taking his place. What happens when the galaxy's most brutal race doesn't just win a war, but inherits an empire? In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. For 10,000 years, the Imperium of Man has stood as humanity's last bastion against the horrors of the galaxy. 1,000,000 worlds, countless billions of souls, all united under the golden light of the God-Emperor. But what happens when that light finally dies? What happens when the greatest threat to human civilization isn't chaos or Tyranids, or the ancient Necrons awakening from their tomb worlds? What happens when it's something far worse? Something that feeds on war itself. The Orks, green-skinned, brutal, endless. For millennia, they've been dismissed as mere savages. Crude Xenos who fight with scrap metal and primitive weapons. The Imperium's generals called them a manageable threat, a contained problem. They were catastrophically wrong. Because the Orks don't just wage war. They are war. Every battle makes them stronger. Every victory breeds 1,000 more warriors. Every defeat only teaches them to fight harder. And in the 41st millennium, something unprecedented happened. The scattered Ork clans united under a single banner. A beast of unimaginable cunning and brutality rose from the fungal depths of their spawning worlds. Gazkul Mag Uruk Thraka, the prophet of the WAAAGH. What followed wasn't just another Xenos incursion. It was the systematic dismantling of human civilization. World after world fell to the Green Tide. Space Marine chapters, the Emperor's finest warriors, were ground to dust beneath crude Ork boots. Imperial fleets burned in the void, their wreckage becoming raw material for ramshackle Ork war machines. The smell of burning promethium mixed with alien spores. The screams of dying guardsmen drowned beneath guttural Ork war cries. Cities that had stood for millennia crumbled in hours. Terra itself, the throne world, humanity's sacred heart, came under siege. The golden palace walls, built to withstand the fury of Horus himself, buckled under waves of green flesh and crude explosives. The custodes, the Emperor's personal guard, fought room by room through corridors slick with blood and fungal growth. In the end, even they weren't enough. The unthinkable happened. The Imperium fell. But this isn't a story about defeat. This is about what comes after. What happens when the Orks win everything they ever wanted. Because victory, for creatures born from violence, brings its own special kind of horror. That was just the beginning. Commander Thane pressed his palm against the cold metal of the observation deck. Through the reinforced glass, he watched the last human world burn. The Ork victory wasn't swift. It was methodical. Across 10,000 systems, the green tide had swept away everything. Space Marines, Imperial Guard, even the legendary Astartes fell to crude axes and roaring chainswords. But this wasn't conquest. This was transformation. The smell of burning promethium filled recycled air as Thane studied the tactical displays. Red dots vanished one by one. Each represented 1 billion souls. "Sir, incoming transmission from Sector Command," his aide whispered. The hologram flickered to life. General Korath's face was streaked with soot and blood. "The Orks aren't taking prisoners." Korath's voice cracked through static. "They're not enslaving populations. They're doing something worse." Thane's throat tightened. "What do you mean?" "They're turning everything into battlefields. Every world, every moon, every asteroid." The transmission cut to orbital footage. Thane watched in horror as Ork mechs welded massive gun platforms to the surface of a peaceful agri-world. Civilians ran screaming as their farms became trenches. "They're not interested in ruling," Korath continued. "They want eternal war." The tactical display showed the pattern emerging across the galaxy. Forge worlds converted to weapon factories. Hive cities restructured as massive arenas. Even dead worlds seeded with Ork spores to create new battlegrounds. Thane's hands trembled as he realized the truth. The Orks hadn't won to build an empire. They'd won to ensure the fighting never stopped. "Sir," his aide's voice was barely audible. "Long-range sensors are detecting something." The display zoomed out, showing the galactic map. Green spread like infection across every sector. But there was a pattern. The Orks were deliberately leaving pockets of resistance alive. Small human enclaves, scattered Eldar craft worlds, even some Tau colonies, not from mercy, from necessity. They needed enemies to fight. The galaxy had become one massive, perpetual war zone. And the Orks were its eternal gardeners, cultivating conflict like farmers, tending crops. Thane watched another red dot vanish from the display. His homeworld. The temperature in the room seemed to drop as the horrible mathematics became clear. The Orks would keep just enough opposition alive to maintain the war forever, a sustainable apocalypse. "Commander," the aide whispered, pointing at the tactical screen. "We're receiving a transmission. It's from an Ork." But what the Ork said next would shatter everything Thane thought he knew about their victory. The smell of desperation hung thick in the underground chambers of Terra. High Lord Militant Vex stood before the most unlikely war council in Imperial history, Space Marines who had fought each other for millennia now shared the same table. Chaos Lords with flesh still smoking from warp exposure. Eldar Farseers whose eyes wept tears of crystal. Even the Tyranid hive mind had sent something. The Orks control 60% of the galaxy. Vex's voice cracked like breaking stone. They're not just winning, they're learning. The holographic displays showed green tide after green tide. Ork fleets that moved with tactical precision. WAAAGH energies that bent reality itself to their will. Chaos. Lord Malthius laughed, the sound like grinding metal. You want us to save the Imperium? After 10,000 years of war? I want us to save existence itself. The Eldar Farseer spoke, her voice like wind through dying leaves. We have seen the paths. When the Orks achieve perfect unity, when their collective belief becomes absolute. She didn't finish. She didn't need to. The chamber fell silent except for the distant rumble of Ork artillery above. Even here, kilometers beneath the Imperial Palace, the sound of their advance was growing louder. A Space Marine captain removed his helmet, revealing scars that told stories of 100 battles. What makes you think we can succeed where the Emperor failed? Because we're already dead, Vex replied. All of us. Every faction, every species. The Orks don't just conquer, they absorb. Their belief makes reality bend. Soon there won't be chaos or order, just green. The Tyranid creature, a writhing mass of synapses and flesh, pulsed with bioluminescent agreement. Even the great Devour feared what the Orks were becoming. Outside, the artillery stopped. The silence was worse than the bombardment. Vex's hands trembled as he activated the final hologram. It showed Ork technology that shouldn't exist. Weapons powered by pure belief. Ships that moved faster than thought because the Orks simply believed they could. They're not just winning through force anymore, he whispered. They're rewriting the fundamental laws of reality, making the universe simpler, more brutal, more Orky, the Chaos Lord finished. The ground above them shook. Dust rained from ancient ceramite beams. Then they heard it. The sound that made even Chaos Marines step back in fear. Ork laughter, echoing through the palace walls. But what terrified them most wasn't the laughter itself. It was how organized it sounded. Captain Valdez pressed his face against the cold adamantium of the Eternity Gate. The metal vibrated with each impact from outside. Boom, boom, boom. The Orks had been hammering at the Emperor's palace for 72 hours straight. Their crude siege engines, built from scavenged Imperial tanks and pure brutality, cracked the defenses that had stood for 10,000 years. Sir, the outer walls are failing, his Vox operator whispered. Static filled the channel. Even their communications were dying. Valdez could smell the acrid smoke seeping through the ventilation systems. Somewhere above them, the palace burned. The Golden Throne Room itself was under siege. Through the fortress walls, he heard them. Millions of green-skinned monsters roaring in their primitive tongue. WAAAGH! WAAAGH! The sound made his bones ache, but it wasn't just the noise that terrified him. It was the silence between the roars. In those quiet moments, Valdez heard something worse than Orc savagery. He heard Imperial citizens screaming. The Orks had broken through the hive cities. They were already inside Terra's lower levels, butchering civilians by the millions. The temperature dropped as the palace's power grid failed section by section. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red. Valdez's breath formed clouds in the freezing air. Captain, a voice crackled through his Vox. This is Sergeant Torres, level -7. They're eating the wounded, sir. Valdez closed his eyes. The Orks didn't just kill, they consumed. They turned victory into a feast of flesh and bone. Another explosion shook the palace. Dust rained from the ceiling like snow. Through the static, he heard reports flooding in from across Terra. The spaceports had fallen. The administratum was burning. The Orks were dragging custodians through the streets like trophies. Then came the sound that broke his spirit entirely. The Golden Throne's life support systems powered down with a mechanical wheeze. After 10 millennia of keeping the Emperor's broken body alive, the machines finally died. Terra's Astronomicon, the psychic lighthouse that guided ships across the galaxy, flickered once, then went dark forever. In that moment, Valdez realized the horrible truth. This wasn't just Terra falling. This was humanity's extinction beginning. Without the Emperor's psychic beacon, every Imperial world would be lost in the warp. The Orks hadn't just won a battle. They had doomed an entire species. But what happened next would make Terra's fall look like mercy. The stench of burning promethium fills the void where Terra once stood. Gazkul Mag-Uruk Thraka sits upon a throne carved from the Golden Throne itself. The psychic screams of a billion dying souls still echo through the warp-tainted metal. But this is not the end. This is the beginning. Across the galaxy, green-skinned hordes pour through the ruins of humanity's greatest strongholds. The Imperial Palace becomes a sprawling scrapyard. The Astronomicon's light dies, replaced by the crude glow of Ork furnaces. The smell of rust and oil permeates everything now. On WAAAGH, Ork mech boys tear apart Guilliman's fortress monastery. Ancient marble crumbles under crude hammers. The sound of grinding metal drowns out the wind. Every Space Marine chapter world burns. The Adeptus Mechanicus forge worlds fare no better. Mars itself becomes a playground for Ork technology. Sacred STCs are melted down for scrap. 10,000 years of human knowledge disappears in clouds of black smoke. But here's what no one expected. The Orks don't just destroy. They build. Gazkul's empire spreads like a green tide across the galaxy. Crude space hulks become mobile cities. Asteroid belts transform into massive shipyards. The cold vacuum fills with the sound of hammering and welding. On former hive worlds, Ork settlements sprawl endlessly. The air tastes of metal shavings and fungal spores. Gretchens scurry through streets built from salvaged Imperial architecture. The temperature never drops below sweltering. Million-strong Ork armies march where once proud regiments of Imperial guards stood. Their boots crush the bones of the last defenders. The ground trembles under their weight. Chaos itself recoils from this green apocalypse. The dark gods watch in horror as their greatest enemy isn't replaced by another threat to corrupt. It's replaced by something far worse. Something that can't be corrupted. Something that finds joy in pure destruction. Eldar craft worlds drift silent through space, their occupants dead or fled. Tau colonies lie abandoned, their technology scavenged for Ork war machines. Even Tyranid hive fleets avoid sectors now marked by green. The galaxy bleeds emerald. But in the deepest vaults of Gazkul's new empire, something stirs. Ancient human technology, thought lost forever. Machines that predate even the dark age of technology. The Orks have found humanity's greatest secret, and they're about to use it in ways its creators never imagined. The real horror hadn't even begun. The stench of burning promethium fills the command bunker as Lord Commander Valeth stares at the holographic display. Green tide markers surge across every sector. 5 billion Orks. Still growing. His hands shake as he reaches for the encrypted Voxcaster, The weight of what he's about to do could damn his soul for eternity. Open a channel to the Chaos Fleet, he whispers. His aide's face goes pale. Sir, that's heresy, I know. Violet's voice cracks. But the Orks don't distinguish between Imperial and Chaos when they're eating our children alive. Across the galaxy, similar scenes unfold in shadowed war rooms. Eldar Farseers commune with Tau ethereals through psychic networks that burn their minds. Dark Eldar Archons negotiate with Space Marine chapter masters over piles of fresh corpses. The impossible becomes inevitable. On Cadia's shattered remains, Abaddon the Despoiler stands beside Captain Lysander of the Imperial Fists. Neither speaks. Both watch Ork gargants tear through the ruins where they once slaughtered each other. Your Emperor failed you, Abaddon finally says. Your gods failed you first, Lysander replies. They charge together into the Green Horde. The alliances form like scar tissue over mortal wounds. Desperate, ugly, necessary. Tyranid hive ships coordinate with Imperial Navy vessels, their bioships serving as living shields against Ork rocks. The great Devourer recognizes a greater threat to its feast. Necron tomb worlds activate protocols not used since the War in Heaven. Ancient programming adapts. The Orks represent entropy incarnate, antithetical to Necron order. Even the Cetan stir in their prisons, whispering cooperation through dimensional barriers. But cooperation comes with a price written in blood and betrayal. On Armageddon, Commissar Helena Voss executes 3 of her own officers for refusing to fight alongside word-bearers. Their crimson armor still bears the 8-pointed star, but their bolters fire at green flesh. Forgive me, Emperor, she prays, pulling the trigger again. The temperature in the bunker drops as warp entities manifest. Chaos and Imperial Psychers link minds, their combined screams echoing across the Imperium. Reality bleeds at the edges. Some alliances hold for days, others crumble in hours when old hatreds resurface. But for the first time in 10,000 years, the galaxy's greatest enemies stand united against a common threat. The Orks notice. War Boss Scarjaw throws back his massive head and laughs. His tusks gleam with fresh blood as he watches the Alliance fleets approach his position. Finally, a proper fight. But as the first shots are fired, something impossible happens. The galaxy burns green. Across 10,000 worlds, the sound echoes like thunder through broken cathedrals. The roar of engines, the crash of metal on bone, the wet crack of skulls beneath crude hammers. This is the sound of Ork victory. But here's what the Imperium's greatest strategists never understood about the Greenskins. What Gilliman's Codex never accounted for. What even Chaos couldn't predict. Orks don't just win wars, they become the war. On Armageddon Prime, where the last Imperial holdouts finally fell, something horrifying happened. The Orks didn't celebrate, they didn't loot, they didn't even eat the corpses. They got bored. Within days, the WAAAGH, energy that had sustained them for decades, began to turn inward. Gork and Mork's blessing became a curse. The psychic field that made their ramshackle technology work started demanding fresh violence, fresh enemies. The first Ork civil war lasted 3 hours. Clan Goff turned on Clan Bad Moons over a disputed pile of scrap metal. The carnage painted the ruins of Hive Tartarus in arterial red. But it wasn't enough. The WAAAGH field grew hungrier, more desperate, like a starving beast that had tasted blood and found it wanting. So the Orks did what they always do when faced with a problem. They fought harder. Every victory bred 10 new conflicts. Every dead enemy created a power vacuum that demanded filling with violence. The Greenskin Empire began eating itself from within, a Ouroboros of endless brutality. The temperature on conquered worlds dropped as smoke from burning cities blocked out the sun. The air grew thick with the copper taste of blood and the acrid sting of burning promethium. And still the WAAAGH demanded more. Here's the cosmic joke that would make even Tzeentch laugh. The Orks' greatest strength, their ability to grow stronger through conflict, becomes their ultimate weakness when there's no one left to fight. They become a cancer, a green tide that consumes everything, including itself, in an endless cycle of violence that serves no purpose beyond the violence itself. The galaxy doesn't end with the bang of exterminatus or the whisper of chaos corruption. It ends with the wet thud of orc against orc, forever and ever, until the stars themselves grow cold and dark. But the real horror isn't the endless war. It's what happens when they finally run out of things to kill. The Tyranid hive fleet Leviathan had consumed 17 worlds in 3 months. But the Orks didn't care about statistics. WAAAGH. Scarjaw crashed into the bioships like a green tsunami of scrap metal and fury. The void screamed with the sound of chainsaw teeth grinding through chitin armor. Ork rocks, hollowed-out asteroids packed with engines and guns, punched through Tyranid vessels like bullets through paper. Scarjaw himself stood on the bridge of his kill cruiser, watching the galaxy's most perfect predators die. The irony was beautiful in its horror. Tyranids had evolved for billions of years to be the ultimate consumers. They stripped worlds bare, absorbed every scrap of biomass, left nothing but dead rock behind. They were hunger incarnate. The Orks were just better at killing. More Daka. Scarjaw roared, his voice carrying across Vox channels to 10,000 ships. The response was immediate. Every gun, every missile, every ramming prow turned toward the Tyranid swarm. The darkness lit up like a festival of destruction. But here's what the Imperium never understood about this moment. The Tyranids weren't just losing a battle. They were learning every dead orc, every destroyed ship, every tactical maneuver. It all fed into the hive mind's vast consciousness. The great Devourer was studying its conquerors, absorbing their methods, understanding their madness. And in the deepest bioships, hidden in chambers of living flesh, something new was growing. Scarjaw felt it first as a tremor in his gut. That primal orc instinct that screamed when something was wrong. The feeling that made him the greatest war boss in the galaxy. The Tyranid fleet was retreating, but they weren't running. They were repositioning. "Boss," his mech whispered, staring at the sensor readings. "They ain't running away. They's changing." On the screens, impossible shapes writhed in the darkness. Bioships that had been sleek and predatory were swelling, mutating, growing new appendages. The hive mind was adapting in real time, incorporating orc aggression into its own genetic matrix. Scarjaw's grin widened. Finally, a proper fight. But as the first mutated bioship turned back toward his fleet, something glinted in its new armor plating. Something that looked disturbingly familiar, or rather, someone. But what they saw next would redefine the very nature of war itself. In the screaming void between realities, the Chaos Gods feel something they haven't experienced in eons. Fear Khorne's brass throne cracks under his grip. The smell of burning metal fills his realm as he watches his endless wars end. Not in glorious defeat, not in tactical brilliance, in laughter. The Orks don't worship him through violence. They worship through joy. Every brutal swing of their choppas brings giggles. Every explosion sparks celebration. War becomes a game, and games don't feed the blood god. They starve him with happiness. Tzeentch's crystal maze begins to collapse. His schemes require complexity, politics, betrayal. But orcs don't scheme. They see enemy. They charge. They win. His 1,000 plots become meaningless when faced with beings who solve every problem with overwhelming force and infectious optimism. The changer of ways watches his carefully laid plans crumble like sand. Nurgle feels his plagues rejected, not through medicine or technology, but through sheer orc stubbornness. Disease tries to take hold, but orc physiology adapts with frightening speed. Their crude biology becomes their greatest weapon against entropy itself. Even death becomes optional when you're having too much fun to die. Slaanesh writhes in confusion. Pleasure requires sophistication, excess demands refinement. But orcs find perfect satisfaction in simple things. A good fight, a loud explosion, a well-tuned engine. Their pure joy in basic pleasures makes the Prince of Excess irrelevant. The four gods realize the horrible truth. Chaos needs civilization to corrupt. It needs hope to crush, order to pervert, life to decay, pain to transform into pleasure. But orcs don't build civilizations. They build war machines. They don't hope. They act. They don't create order. They create magnificent, beautiful chaos, their own chaos. In the warp, something new stirs, something green, something laughing. The psychic energy of quadrillions of happy orcs begins to coalesce into something unprecedented. Gork and Mork aren't just orc gods anymore. They're becoming the dominant force in the warp itself. The temperature in every chaos realm drops. The sound of distant laughter echoes through dimensions that have known only screaming for millions of years. Ancient demons pause mid-torment, confused by the alien sound of genuine happiness. Khorne stands from his cracking throne. His voice shakes reality itself. We must unite. For the first time in eternity, the four gods agree on something. But as they begin to plan their desperate alliance, the laughter grows louder. And in the material universe, the orcs prepare for their greatest fight yet. Deep beneath the shattered worlds of the Imperium, something stirs. The orc, WAAAGH, has raged for 3 solar decades. Cities burn, hive worlds crack like broken eggs. The green tide seems unstoppable, but the thunder of orc boots triggers ancient sensors. Tomb worlds, silent for 60 million years. Buried beneath planets the orcs now claim as their own. The vibrations penetrate deeper than any human excavation ever reached, past layers of sediment and stone, down to chambers where death sleeps in perfect geometric rows. Cron matrices flicker to life. Green light pulses through corridors that predate human civilization. The smell of ozone fills spaces that have known only vacuum. Temperature readings spike as dormant reactors ignite. The Necrons begin to wake, not all at once. Never all at once. That would be inefficient. First, the Immortals, skeletal warriors whose metal bones remember the taste of star death. Their optical sensors burn emerald in the darkness. Gauss weapons power up with the sound of reality tearing. Then the Overlords. Pharaon Zarek, the Silent King, feels the tremors through his sarcophagus. His consciousness, ancient beyond measure, processes the data streaming from 10,000 worlds. Orcs. Everywhere. The irony tastes like copper and regret. 60 million years ago, the Necrons fought the Old Ones, the same beings who created the orcs as weapons. Now their green children dance on Necron graves, unknowing. Zarek's resurrection protocols engage. Across the galaxy, tomb complexes receive the signal. Canoptek scarabs skitter through maintenance shafts, repairing damage from millennia of neglect. The air grows thick with nanomachines. The Orks feel nothing. They're too busy celebrating. Too drunk on victory to notice the subtle changes, the way shadows seem deeper, how their mech boys' equipment starts malfunctioning near certain dig sites. War boss Grogkilla pounds his chest on the throne room of Terra itself. His massive form casts shadows across golden walls now painted with Ork glyphs. "We is the best," he roars. "Nothing can stop the Orks." Beneath his feet, through layers of rockcrete and adamantium, through the very bedrock of humanity's birth world, something responds. A pulse. Green. Ancient, hungry. The Necrons have been patient. Patient as only the truly dead can be. But patience has limits. And the Orks are about to discover what happens when you wake the galaxy's oldest nightmare. The real war was about to begin. The warlord's throne room stretches beyond sight, carved from the bones of 1 billion dead worlds. Gazgakul Mag Uruk Thraka sits motionless. His massive frame dwarfs even the grotesque throne beneath him. The smell of burned promethium and rotting flesh hangs thick in the recycled air. For 3 standard Terran years, the Great Crusade has been complete. Every human world burns. Every xeno species kneels or dies. The Imperium's golden eagle lies shattered across 1,000 systems, but something gnaws at the prophet of Gork and Mork. His yellow eyes scan the endless reports flowing across holodisplays. Ork settlements spreading like cancer across former Imperial worlds. Billions of greenskins breeding in the ruins of Terra itself. The galaxy painted green from rim to core. Victory tastes like ash in his massive jaws. "Boss," whispers Makari, his faithful grot. The tiny creature trembles as he approaches the throne. "The boys are getting restless." Gazkul's scarred face turns toward his minion. The movement sends ripples of fear through the assembled knobs and war bosses. They've seen that look before, just before entire star systems burned. Restless? The word rumbles like distant thunder. Makari swallows hard. They say the war's over, boss. No more humies to crump, no more proper fights, just building and digging and... The grot's voice dies as Gazkul rises. The warlord's massive boots echo against bone as he walks to the observation deck. Beyond the reinforced glass, Terra's surface stretches endlessly. Where once the Emperor's palace gleamed, now crude Ork settlements sprawl like infected wounds. No golden spires pierce the sky. No Imperial banners flutter in the toxic wind. Only the green tide remains. And in that moment, the terrible truth crashes over Gazgakul like a tidal wave of realization. This isn't victory. This is extinction. Orks exist for war. They breathe conflict. They feed on violence and chaos and the endless dance of battle. Without enemies to fight, without wars to win, they become something else entirely. Something less. Already he can see it beginning. Younger Orks lack the savage fire of their predecessors. They build instead of destroy. They farm instead of raid. The very essence of what makes an Ork is bleeding away with each passing day. Gazgkul's hands clench into fists the size of boulders. He has won everything. Conquered the galaxy. Achieved what no Ork warlord in history ever dreamed possible. And in doing so, he has murdered his entire species. The irony burns like acid in his throat. The greatest Ork victory in galactic history is also their ultimate defeat. They have become the very thing they despised. Peaceful, settled, domesticated. But what Gazgkul does next will shock even the Chaos Gods themselves. The screaming never stops on Ulthway, Farseer Eldrad Ulthran's hands shake as he grips the Wraithbone council chamber. His perfect features, ageless for 3,000 years, now crack like ancient parchment. The Orc invasion fleets darken every star. I have seen 10,000 futures. Eldrad whispers to his assembled seers. In 9,999, we all die screaming. The temperature drops. Frost forms on Wraithbone walls that have never known cold. But there's one future, one thread of possibility. Eldrad's voice hardens. We must wake the Inari. We must wake the dead. The council recoils. Awakening Inaead, the god of death, means sacrificing entire craft worlds. Billions of Eldar souls, fed to birth a deity powerful enough to challenge the Orc tide. You speak of genocide. Farseer Taldir breathes. Eldrad's laugh tastes of ashes. I speak of survival. The ritual begins at midnight. Craftworld Bieltan goes first. Eldrad watches through the scrying pools as their infinity circuit, containing 1 billion souls, burns white-hot. The screams echo across the webway, children's voices, mothers calling for daughters who died millennia ago. The stench of burning souls fills the chamber like charred silk. More, Eldrad commands. His eyes bleed tears of liquid starlight. Saimhan, Alaitok, feed them all to the god. But Inaead stirs and laughs. The newborn death god speaks in a voice like breaking glass. You think I serve you, ancient fool? I am death incarnate. I serve only myself. Inaead turns, not toward the Orcs, toward Terra. The Emperor's soul burns brightest of all. The god whispers. 10,000 years of suffering. Such exquisite agony. Eldrad realizes his mistake too late. In his desperation to stop the Orcs, he's unleashed something worse. A god that feeds on death itself. The Eldar's greatest weapon becomes their executioner. We save no one, Eldrad whispers, as Inaead's shadow falls across Holy Terra. We doomed everyone. The Orcs watch from their invasion fleets, confused. Their greatest enemies are destroying each other. Warboss Gazkul's mechanical jaw clicks in what might be amusement. That's not very sporting, he rumbles, but it makes da job easier. The foresight that made the Eldar masters of fate becomes their blindness. But what happens when death itself joins the war? In the Imperium, something unprecedented was happening. The Chaos Gods, those eternal parasites of emotion and violence, were withering. Khorne, the blood god, sat upon his brass throne, feeling something he had never experienced in eons. Hunger, true, gnawing hunger. The scent of spilled blood that once flooded his realm had become a mere trickle. The metallic tang that sustained him for millennia now barely registered. Across the warp, Tzeentch's crystalline maze cracked and dulled. The changer of ways, master of schemes and ambition, found his plots unraveling into meaningless threads. His 1,000 eyes saw the truth with crystalline clarity. The Orcs weren't feeding them. Nurgle's garden, once blooming with pestilence and despair, began to rot in ways even the plague god found disturbing. His beloved diseases found no fertile ground in Orc physiology. Slaanesh writhed in agony, the Prince of Pleasure discovering that Orcs felt no excess, no refined cruelty, no sophisticated torment, only the simple joy of a good fight. The temperature in the warp dropped. Ancient demons, sustained by mortal emotion for billions of years, began to fade like dying embers. Khorne's brass citadel grew cold to the touch. They don't fear death, Tzeentch whispered, his voice cracking like breaking glass. They don't scheme for power. They don't despair at loss. The Orcs simply fought because fighting was fun. When an Orc died, there was no anguish. No desperate prayer to dark gods. Just a disappointed grunt that the fight had ended. When they won, there was no cruel triumph, no elaborate torture of the defeated. Just a search for the next good scrap. The Chaos gods realized with Mounty, in horror, that they had become irrelevant. For the first time in galactic history, an entire species had achieved something impossible. They had transcended the very emotions that fed the warp's parasites. Khorne stood from his throne, brass armor scraping against brass. The sound echoed hollow through his emptying realm. Demons were already beginning to dissolve. The blood god's skull-faced helm turned toward the material universe, where green-skinned barbarians celebrated their latest victory with simple, pure joy. No hatred, no ambition, no despair, no excess. Just endless, innocent violence. The irony was exquisite in its cruelty. The most violent species in the galaxy had somehow achieved what the Emperor's most noble aspirations could never accomplish. They had starved chaos itself. But in the deepest corners of the warp, something else was stirring. Something that fed not on complex emotions, but on something far more primal. Something that found Ork joy absolutely delicious. The Hive Fleet Kraken had devoured 17 star systems. Billions of screaming bioforms swept across the Octarius sector like a living tsunami. Carnifexes the size of battle tanks. Hormagaunts that moved faster than human eyes could track. The Imperium had fled. The Tau had retreated. Even the Chaos Marines had pulled back from this sector. But the Orks? War Boss Scarjaw stood atop his stampa. Watching the purple tide approach, the ground shook beneath trillions of claws. The air reeked of alien pheromones and digestive acids. His boys were grinning. Finally, a proper fight. The first wave hit like a meteor strike. Termagants crashed into Ork lines with bone-crushing force. Claws met choppas in a symphony of violence that could be heard from orbit. But something impossible happened. The Orks weren't losing. Every dead Ork released spores into the air. Every battlefield became a spawning ground. While Tyranids consumed biomass to reproduce, Orks simply grew. From the blood-soaked earth, War Boss Scarjaw watched a Carnifex tear through his knobs. He laughed as spores from their corpses began sprouting new boys within hours. "You're eating us, but we's growing faster." The hive mind had never encountered this before. Its perfect biological algorithms couldn't compute the mathematics of Ork reproduction. For every Ork consumed, 3 more emerged from the fungal network spreading beneath the surface. Months became years. The war raged across dead worlds. Tyranid bioships began to starve. The hive fleets had consumed entire sectors, but the Ork ecosystem was regenerating faster than they could devour it. Something else was happening. The Orks were getting bigger, stronger. The constant warfare against the galaxy's ultimate predators was forcing rapid evolution. Scarjaw himself had grown to the size of a dreadnought. His voice could shatter reinforced glass. "We ain't just winning. We's becoming something new." The hive mind made a calculation that violated every biological imperative. Retreat. For the first time in galactic history, a Tyranid hive fleet turned away from a food source. The purple swarms began withdrawing to the void, leaving behind worlds carpeted in Ork spores. But the real horror was just beginning to dawn on Imperial observers. These weren't the same Orks anymore. The survivors had been forged in combat against the galaxy's apex predators. They had evolved, and now they were looking toward Terra with hungry eyes. But what they had become in those blood-soaked years would make the Tyranids seem like a mercy. The smell of burning incense mixed with spilled blood fills the conquered cathedral of Terra. Gazgkul. Mag Uruk Thraka stands before the golden throne, its occupant long since reduced to ash and memory. The war boss who once dreamed of endless war has achieved something far more terrifying. Perfection. His massive frame towers over prostrating orc shamans, their chanting voices echoing off marble walls stained green with fungal growth. The psychic field radiating from his skull-plated head warps reality itself. "WAAAGH!" he roars. But the sound carries weight beyond noise. It reshapes the very fabric of space. Across the galaxy, every orc feels the call. Not just to fight, but to worship. The crude religion of Gork and Mork crumbles before this new deity made flesh. Gazgkul's evolution began the moment he claimed the Emperor's throne. The psychic residue of 10,000 years of human devotion didn't dissipate. It transferred. It transformed. His advisors watch in growing unease as their war boss transcends mortality. The iron teeth grafted to his jaw gleam with otherworldly light. His mechanical eye socket weeps tears of liquid metal. "Boss?" ventures Makari, his faithful grot banner-bearer. But Gazgkul no longer hears individual voices. He hears the collective roar of 60 trillion orcs across 1,000,000 worlds, all crying his name in unison. Their belief feeds him, strengthens him, elevates him beyond the crude limitations of flesh. The temperature in the throne room drops as reality bends around his ascending consciousness. On distant battlefields, orc boys pause mid-charge. Their crude weapons transform into relics of divine power. Their ramshackle vehicles sprout impossible technologies that shouldn't work but do, because their god wills it. The irony cuts deeper than any chains word. Humanity's greatest fear wasn't chaos, corruptions, or tyrannid consumption. It was their own obsolescence. Gazgkul achieved what the Emperor never could: true godhood through pure, unfiltered belief. His laughter shakes the palace foundations as he contemplates the cosmic joke. The species that worshipped order and structure has been replaced by one that thrives on chaos and violence. Yet even gods can feel lonely. In the silence between his thunderous heartbeats, Gazgkul remembers the thrill of uncertainty, the joy of not knowing if he'd survive the next battle. Now he knows everything, sees everything, controls everything. The weight of omnipotence settles on his shoulders like a funeral shroud. But what happens when even a god grows bored with absolute victory? The warp screams. Across the Imperium, 4 ancient powers feel something they haven't experienced in millennia. Fear. Khorne's brass throne cracks under his grip. The blood god watches his endless wars dissolve into mindless revelry. Orc victories don't feed him rage, they feed him laughter. The copper taste of spilled blood turns sweet. Bitter. Wrong. This cannot be. Khorne's voice shakes the foundations of his realm. But it is. Every battlefield the orcs claim becomes a carnival of joy, not fury. In Nurgle's garden, plague flowers wilt. The grandfather of decay watches his careful rot become explosive growth. Orc spores don't spread disease, they spread life. Chaotic, unstoppable life. His bloated form shivers as fungal networks replace his viral webs. The stench of corruption gives way to the earthy smell of fresh mushrooms. Tzeentch's crystal maze shatters. The architect of fate discovers something worse than stagnation. Simplicity. Orc cunning operates on pure instinct, immune to his labyrinthine schemes. No plots, no manipulation, just WAAAGH. The temperature around his burning form drops to absolute zero. Slaanesh writhes in agony. The Prince of Pleasure finds orc joy too pure, too innocent. Their ecstasy comes from simple violence, not corruption. Each Ork victory feels like sandpaper against silk. The four powers convene for the first time since the war in heaven. Their combined presence tears holes in reality itself. The green tide must be stopped. Tzeentch's 1,000 voices whisper in unison. Agreed. Khorne growls, his rage now cold and calculated. They make war into play. Nurgle's laughter bubbles like poison. They make death into birth. Slaanesh's scream harmonizes with cosmic frequencies. They make pain into pleasure without corruption. The Chaos Gods forge an alliance born of desperation. They will corrupt the Orks from within, twist their simple joy into something darker. More familiar, they begin to whisper to the biggest, strongest Ork war boss in the galaxy. Ghazghkull Maguruk Thraka. But as their combined power reaches toward the prophet of the WAAAGH, something unexpected happens. Ghazghkull looks up from his latest conquest. His scarred face splits into a massive grin. Oi, you lot sound like you need a good crumpin'. The warp itself holds its breath, because for the first time in cosmic history, a mortal has just threatened the Chaos Gods, and meant it. The stench of burning worlds drifted through the command chambers of Terra. High Lord Militant Cassius stood before the holographic display, watching red markers consume sector after sector. The Ork WAAAGH had shattered 3 Imperial battle fleets in as many weeks. How many worlds have we lost? His voice cracked like old parchment. 47 confirmed fallen, my lord. The aide's hands trembled as she spoke. 17 more under siege. The numbers meant nothing anymore. Each red dot represented billions of souls fed to Ork war machines. Across the galaxy, desperate transmissions crackled through the void. Eldar Farseers emerged from their hidden craft worlds, their ancient eyes reflecting visions of extinction. Tau commanders abandoned their greater good philosophy, begging for human alliance. Even the Necrons stirred in their tomb worlds. Cassius watched the enemy advance markers pulse like a diseased heartbeat. Green, always green, the color of inevitable death. Sir, we're receiving communications from unexpected sources. The hologram shimmered. Alien faces materialized, some familiar, others horrifying in their desperation. Eldar autarchs with tears streaming down porcelain cheeks. Tau ethereals speaking in broken Gothic, and something else. A figure stepped from the shadows of the transmission array. Power armor gleamed midnight blue, trimmed with silver skulls. Chaos Space Marines, Cassius whispered. The traitor Marine's voice was silk wrapped around razors. The Orks consume everything, loyalist. Even we understand this truth. Cassius felt his world tilt. Chaos, the eternal enemy, offering alliance against the green tide. You would fight alongside us? We would fight to survive. Nothing more. The chamber fell silent, except for the hum of dying worlds. Every principle of the Imperium screamed against this unholy alliance. 10,000 years of hatred and war. But the alternative was extinction. Cassius looked at the red markers spreading like cancer across the galaxy map. The Orks had already consumed the Tau homeworld. Craft world Ulthwé burned in the void. Even demon worlds fell to their endless hunger. What guarantee do we have? The Chaos Marine's helm tilted. None. But when the Orks finish with you, they'll come for us. Better to die fighting than be devoured like cattle. Cassius reached for the Alliance protocols, his finger hovering over the activation rune. Then the lights went out. Emergency klaxons wailed as the chamber plunged into crimson darkness. Sir! The aide's scream cut through the chaos. Ork ships. They're in the Sol system. But the real horror hadn't even begun. Gazkul Maguruk Thraka stands atop the shattered remnants of Terra's imperial palace. The wind carries the acrid smoke of 1,000 burning worlds. His massive green hands grip the broken aquila, golden fragments crumbling between his fingers like ancient bone. For the first time in 10 millennia of war, the galaxy falls silent. No more imperial hymns echo through the void. No more space marine battle cries pierce the darkness. The eternal war machine that fed the Orks their purpose has finally stopped. Gazkul's scarred face twists into something resembling confusion. The other Ork war bosses gather around him, their massive forms casting shadows across the marble floors where Primarchs once walked. They grunt and snarl, waiting for orders that don't come, because Gazkul has realized something terrible. The Orks were never meant to win. They were designed by the Old Ones as the perfect weapon, a species that grows stronger through conflict, that finds joy only in battle, that literally cannot exist without war. But what happens to a weapon when there's nothing left to fight? The smaller Orks begin to turn on each other, their genetic programming demanding violence. The sound of crude weapons clashing fills the throne room where the Emperor once sat. Gazkul watches his boys tear each other apart. He understands now why the Imperium lasted so long, why humanity clung to their dying emperor for 10,000 years. They weren't just fighting for survival. They were keeping the Orks from this moment, the moment when victory becomes extinction. Without enemies to unite them, without the thrill of conquest, the Ork Empire begins to devour itself. Clan fights clan. War boss challenges war boss. The green tide that swept across the galaxy turns inward like a serpent eating its own tail. Gazkul feels something he's never experienced before. Loneliness. The psychic field that binds all Orks together, the WAAAGH, energy that made them unstoppable, begins to fracture. Without a common enemy, without the shared dream of endless war, the collective consciousness that made them more than savage beasts starts to collapse. He looks out at the burning galaxy and sees not triumph, but the end of everything his species was meant to be. The Orks had won the war, but in winning, they had lost themselves. Gazkul raises his massive power claw to the ash-filled sky, and for the first time in his life, he doesn't know what to fight next. Then he hears it, a sound that makes his blood run cold. The silence that followed the Ork victory lasted exactly 3 Terran days. Then the fighting began again. WAAAGH. Gazkul stood in the ruins of the Imperial Palace, his massive frame silhouetted against the burning Terra skyline. The golden throne lay shattered beneath his iron boots. The Emperor's corpse had been fed to his squigs hours ago, but victory tasted wrong in his mouth. "Boss," Makari whispered, tugging at his warlord's armor. "Da boys are getting restless." Gazkul's red eyes scanned the horizon. Across the devastated cityscape, Ork mobs were already turning on each other. Without enemies to fight, without a war to win, the green tide was consuming itself. The stench of burning promethium mixed with spilled Ork blood. The temperature dropped as Terra's dying sun cast long shadows through the smoke. In the distance, the rhythmic pounding of slug throwers echoed off broken cathedral walls. "Dis ain't right," Gazkul growled, his voice carrying the weight of cosmic disappointment. The Ork psychic field that had sustained their impossible victory was fracturing. Without the focused rage of war, without the pure joy of endless battle. The WAAAGH! Energy scattered like ash in the wind. Boss Scarjaw's mob had claimed the Administratum sector. Boss Grimskull controlled the old Mechanicus forges. Already crude fortifications were rising as clan fought clan for the right to rule the conquered galaxy. But ruling wasn't fighting. Gazkul's massive fist clenched around his power claw. The metal groaned under the pressure. He had dreamed of this moment for decades. The final victory, the last enemy crushed, the galaxy painted green. He never imagined how empty it would feel. "Boss?" Makari pressed, his small voice barely audible above the distant explosions. In the ruins below, a young orc Nob was rallying his boys for an assault on a rival clan's position. His war cry echoed through the devastated streets. "WAAAGH! For the glory of—" The words died in his throat. Glory of what? There were no more Humies to fight, no more Chaos Marines to crump, no more Eldar to chase across the stars, just orcs, fighting orcs, forever. Gazkul's scarred face twisted into something that might have been a smile, or a snarl. In the green madness of orc logic, perhaps there was no difference. "Get the boys ready, Makari," he rumbled, raising his power claw to catch the dying light. "We's got a new war to fight." But as the words left his lips, a new sound cut through the chaos, something that made even the mighty Gazrakal pause. Farseer Idranel's hands trembled as the infinity circuit pulsed beneath her fingertips. The wraithbone walls of Ulthway screamed. Across the void, green flames consumed everything. The orc WAAAGH had shattered 3 craft worlds in as many days. Bealtan's gardens burned. Saim Han's jet bikes lay twisted into scrap monuments. Alatok drifted silent, its wraithbone hull cracked like an eggshell. "The skeins of fate show only darkness," Idranel whispered to the council. Her voice echoed in the dome chamber, where 10,000 years of prophecy had been recorded. Now those prophecies meant nothing. The orcs didn't follow fate. They rewrote it with violence and laughter. Outside, the first rock assault ships appeared like tumors against the stars, each one the size of a mountain, bristling with guns and packed with screaming greenskins who had already tasted Eldar blood. The craft world's weapon batteries opened fire. Lance strikes that could crack continents barely scratched the rock hulls. The orcs had learned, adapted. Their technology now incorporated the psychic resonance of conquered Eldar souls. "They're using our own dead against us," whispered Autarch Theriana. Watching the tactical displays, the irony cut deeper than any blade. The Eldar, who had spent millennia preserving their souls in Wraithbone, now watched as orc mechs welded those same soul stones into their war machines. Every shot fired by the orcs carried the screaming essence of fallen Eldar. The first boarding pods punched through Ulthway's hull like bullets through silk. Wraithguards moved to intercept, their ancient forms animated by the souls of the dead. But even the dead could feel fear. Idranel closed her eyes and reached into the warp. The psychic scream that emerged shattered windows across 3 decks. She had seen the final vision. The orcs would not just kill them. They would not just loot their technology. They would turn the craft worlds into mobile fortresses. Orc settlements grafted onto Eldar bone. The most elegant creations in the galaxy transformed into crude weapons of war. The Wraithbone would still sing, but it would sing orc war chants. "How many more craft worlds remain?" Theriana asked. Idranel's answer came as a whisper. "After today, none that matter." The orc boarding parties had reached the Infinity Circuit's core chamber, but what they found there would change everything the Eldar thought they knew about death. In the warp, something unprecedented was happening. The 4 chaos gods, Khorne, Nurgle, Tzeentch, and Slaanesh, writhed in their eternal domains as their sustenance began to dwindle. For 10,000 years, They had fed on the emotions of war, the rage of space marines, the despair of dying worlds, the scheming of ambitious generals. But Orc warfare was different. Khorne, the blood god, felt it first. His brass throne trembled as the quality of violence changed across the galaxy. Where once he had gorged on calculated fury and noble sacrifice, now there was only fun. The Orcs didn't fight with hatred. They fought because it was Tuesday. They didn't rage against their enemies. They laughed as they pulled triggers. When a war boss named Scarjaw lost his entire left arm to a plasma cannon, he simply picked it up and beat his attacker with it, cackling the entire time. "Wow! That was a good shot, you get." This wasn't the sophisticated anger that fed Khorne's power. This was pure, innocent joy. Tzeentch, the changer of ways, fared no better. His crystal labyrinth grew dim as galactic strategy dissolved into beautiful chaos. The Orcs had no grand schemes, no master plans. When Warboss Gracklaw decided to attack a space marine fortress, his entire tactical briefing consisted of, "We go dat way and crump 'em good." The fortress fell in 6 hours. Nurgle watched his garden of decay wither as Orc medicine, consisting mainly of duct tape and optimism, somehow worked. Orc pain boys would reattach severed limbs with rusty bolts and a cheerful, "You'll be right as rain, boss." And the patients lived, because they believed they would. Slaanesh, the Prince of Excess, found the greatest insult of all. The Orcs were completely satisfied with simple pleasures. A good fight, a loud explosion, a particularly shiny bit of scrap metal. They needed nothing more. As the Chaos Gods weakened, their demons began to fade. Bloodletters found themselves unable to manifest in realms where violence was just another form of entertainment. Plague-bearers discovered their diseases couldn't take hold in bodies that refused to acknowledge pain. The warp itself began to calm. For the first time in galactic history, the immaterial realm grew quiet. The screaming winds of tormented souls settled into gentle breezes. The seas of blood became still ponds reflecting nothing but stars. In the material universe, psychers across 1,000 worlds felt the change. The constant pressure of chaos, influence, simply stopped. But something else was stirring in that newfound silence. Something that had been waiting for this moment for 65 million years. The silence is what breaks him. Gazkul Mag Uruk Thraka stands atop the ruins of Holy Terra, his massive frame casting shadows across the Emperor's shattered throne. The Golden Palace burns behind him, its ancient corridors echoing with nothing. No screams, no gunfire, no glorious combat, just the wet crunch of his boots on broken ceramite and the distant pop of cooling metal. The air tastes of ash and victory, but victory tastes like dust in his mouth. "WAAAGH!" he bellows. But the sound dies against empty walls. His boys shuffle nervously. They've conquered everything. Every space marine chapter lies broken. Every imperial world burns green. The Chaos Gods themselves fled rather than face the endless tide of Orc fury. But Orcs weren't built for winning. They were built for fighting. Gazkul's massive fist clenches around the Emperor's crown, crushing it to powder. The metal cuts his palm, drawing thick red blood that drips onto marble floors. "Boss," whispers Makari, his faithful grot. "What do we do now?" The question hangs in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. For the first time in his existence, Gazkul Thraka has no answer. No enemy to crush, no war to wage, no glorious death in battle to seek. He looks out across the galaxy he's conquered. Trillions dead. Entire species extinct. worlds reduced to green-skinned playgrounds where orcs mill about, confused and restless. Without war, what is an orc? The temperature drops as Terra's dying atmosphere bleeds into space. Gazkul shivers, not from cold, but from a sensation he's never felt before. Boredom. It crawls under his skin like parasites, eating away at the warrior's soul that defined him. His boys begin fighting among themselves, desperate for any conflict. But even that feels hollow. They've broken the galaxy's greatest game. In boardrooms across our world, executives calculate engagement metrics and quarterly growth. They optimize for victory, for domination, for total market capture. But what happens when you win everything? When there's nothing left to conquer? Gazkul stares into the void between stars, understanding finally dawning in his crude but cunning mind. The greatest enemy wasn't the Imperium or chaos. It was success itself. Every empire that achieves total victory faces the same hollow throne. Every conqueror discovers the same terrible truth. When the war ends, what defines the warrior? When the game is won, who remembers how to play? Subscribe if you dare to witness the final chapter of this cosmic tragedy. The last Imperial Cathedral burns on Terra. Smoke rises from 10,000 worlds, carrying the ashes of civilization into the void. The Orks have won their ultimate war, but victory tastes different than they imagined. Gazkul Thraka stands where the golden throne once blazed. His massive frame casts shadows across marble floors slick with blood. The silence feels wrong, no more enemies to fight. Across the galaxy, orc war bands lumber through empty cities. Their war cries echo off dead walls. The thrill of battle fades like smoke from cooling guns. Where's the next fight, boss? The question haunts every greenskin world. They built their entire existence around eternal war. Now they've won everything, and winning feels like dying. The orcs turn on each other with desperate hunger. Brother fights brother in the ruins of the Imperium. The WAAAGH energy that once united them fractures into 1,000 smaller conflicts. Blood still flows, but it tastes of ash and emptiness. On Armageddon, orc mechs dismantle their own war machines for scrap. The great factories fall silent. Without enemies to crush, their weapons become meaningless metal. The irony cuts deeper than any chains word. They destroyed the galaxy to save it from boredom. Now boredom is all that remains. Some orcs retreat into the wilderness, hunting shadows and memories. Others build monuments to battles that will never come again. The lucky ones forget what victory means. The unlucky ones remember. In the deepest bunkers of Terra, human survivors whisper a terrible truth. The orcs didn't just win the war. They won themselves into extinction. Without conflict, without challenge, without the endless dance of violence that gave their lives meaning, the Greenskin Empire begins to rot from within. The galaxy belongs to them now, and they've never been more miserable. Centuries pass. The orc population dwindles. Their technology rusts. Their culture crumbles into forgotten legends of the great wars their grandfathers fought. The final orc dies alone on a dead world, clutching a broken weapon, dreaming of enemies that no longer exist. Silence claims the galaxy at last. In our world, we celebrate victory without understanding its price. We fight for dominance, for conquest, for the sweet taste of triumph. But what happens when there's nothing left to win? Every empire that achieves total victory discovers the same cruel joke. Success is the ultimate failure. The real question isn't whether we can win the war. It's whether we can survive the victory. Every subscription is a vote for more uncomfortable truths. Every view, A step deeper into the darkness we pretend doesn't exist.